There comes a moment in life when the ground beneath you starts shaking. The plans you made fall apart. The doors you were sure would open slam shut. And suddenly, nothing feels certain anymore. That's the moment fear shows up. Loud, confident, and ready to take over your life. But what if I told you, you don't have to let fear have the final say? What if this uncertainty is not the end, but the beginning of something God has been trying to do in you all along? Life has a way of testing our faith when we least expect it. One phone call, one diagnosis, one betrayal, one unexpected shift. And suddenly, the certainty you once had feels like it's been snatched away. What? But this is where the choice comes in. Will you be guided by fear, or will you stand on faith? Because fear will always give you a reason to stop, but faith will give you the courage to keep moving even when you can't see the whole path. Faith is not pretending that everything is okay. It's trusting that God is still in control when everything feels like it's falling apart. Fear tells you to prepare for the worst, but faith whispers, God is already working for your best. Fear makes you focus on what you can't do, but faith shifts your eyes to what God can do. When you walk by faith, you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to know the one who does. You may not know how the bills will be paid, but faith says, God is my provider. You may not know when the healing will come, but faith says, God is my healer. You may not know how this season will end, but faith says, God writes my story, and he has never failed me yet. A fear wants to paralyze you, but faith will activate you. Fear wants to keep you in the boat, but faith says, step out on the water. Faith doesn't wait for the storm to stop. It walks through the storm, trusting the one who commands the wind and the waves. If you only trust God when things make sense, that's not faith. That's comfort. True faith is trusting him when nothing makes sense, when the timeline is unclear, when the ending hasn't been revealed yet. It's the ability to stand in the middle of the unknown and still declare, I believe. Every time you choose faith over fear, you're telling the enemy, you can't have my peace. You can't have my mind. You can't have my future. You're drawing a line in the sand and saying, I will not be moved by what I see. I will be moved by what I know. And I know my God is faithful. And here's the truth. Uncertain times will come. You can't avoid them, but you can decide who you will be in them. Will you be the one who shrinks back in fear? Will you be the one who stands tall in faith? Because the God who brought you through before will bring you through again. So today, take a deep breath. Release what you can't control and choose faith, not because the fear isn't real, but because your God is greater. Fear is a natural reaction to the unknown. The moment life throws you into a season you didn't plan for, fear is usually the first thing to knock at your door. It comes dressed in what ifs and maybes, whispering worst case scenarios into your ear. When the future feels unclear, fear will try to convince you that the safest option is to stop moving, to stay small, to avoid taking risks. But here's the truth. Fear only has as much power as you give it. In moments of uncertainty, fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It will tell you, be careful, don't try that, you might fail. And yes, wisdom is important. But fear's version of wisdom is actually limitation. It's a counterfeit voice designed to keep you from stepping into what God has already prepared for you. You have to be able to recognize when fear is talking, so you can decide not to let it run your life. Faith, on the other hand, doesn't mean you ignore the risks. It means you acknowledge them, but believe that God is bigger than them. Choosing faith over fear is an intentional decision, not a one-time moment. Every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, you'll be faced with opportunities to either step forward in trust or shrink back in worry. Faith is not the absence of fear. It's moving in spite of it. Think about how fear operates. It magnifies problems and minimizes possibilities. It makes the obstacle look larger than the promise. Faith flips that script. Faith magnifies God's power and shrinks the problem down to its actual size. Faith reminds you that mountain hills are only big until you remember that God can move them. When you shift your focus from the fear to the one who holds your future, your whole perspective changes. Uncertainty is the perfect breeding ground for fear because it feeds on the unknown. But that same uncertainty is also the perfect breeding ground for faith, because faith thrives when you don't have all the answers. If you knew exactly how everything would work out, you wouldn't need faith at all. The very thing that makes you afraid, the fact that you don't know what's coming, is the same thing that gives faith its power. It's important to remember that fear is loud, but not all powerful. Just because fear shouts doesn't mean you have to listen. You get to choose which voice you respond to. Will you respond to the voice that tells you to hide, or the one that calls you to rise? You let the fear of what could go wrong keep you from stepping into what could go right. Faith is the act of telling fear, you don't get to make my decisions for me. When fear shows up, you have two options: freeze or fight. Freezing means you let fear dictate your moves, keep you still, and rob you of opportunities. Fighting means you take action, no matter how small, that aligns with your faith in God's plan. Sometimes that fight looks like speaking life over yourself. Sometimes it's making a bold decision, and sometimes it's just taking the next right step, even though you can't see the full path. And here's the beautiful thing. Every time you choose faith over fear, your spiritual muscles grow stronger. It becomes easier to recognize fear for what it is, a liar that thrives in uncertainty. The more you practice choosing faith, the more you realize that fear doesn't control you unless you let it. One of the greatest lies fear will tell you in uncertain times is that God must have changed his mind about you. You look at your life, see how far it seems from the vision he once placed in your heart, and you start to wonder, maybe that promise was never real. But here's the truth. God's promises are not fragile. They are not bound to the weather of your circumstances or the timeline you imagined. When God speaks something over your life, it is anchored in eternity, not in the temporary storms you're facing. Sometimes we confuse God's silence with God's absence. Just because you can't see movement doesn't mean there isn't progress. Seeds take time to sprout, and much of their growth happens underground, where the eye cannot see. In the same way, God's promises are often developing in places you can't reach or measure. He is not in a hurry, but He is always on time. The pause is not proof of abandonment. It's preparation for fulfillment. Uncertainty has a way of making us impatient. We want instant results, quick answers, and clear signs. But God's promises are often wrapped in seasons that demand patience. This is not to punish you, but to strengthen you so that when the promise manifests, you can handle it without losing yourself. If He gave it to you too soon, it could crush you. The delay is not denial, it's divine timing at work. Think about it. If God's promises could expire, they would have already been destroyed by the trials you've endured. The fact that you're still here, still standing, still holding on to hope, even if it's by a thread, is evidence that the promise is still alive. The storm might have shaken you, but it didn't remove the word God spoke over you. His word is unshakable, even when you are. Fear will try to convince you that time is your enemy. It will whisper, "You're too old now. You've missed your moment. That dream has passed you by." But God operates outside of time. He can restore lost years, rewrite broken chapters, and resurrect what you thought was over. The same God who raised the dead can breathe life into promises that feel buried. The challenge is to hold on to the promise even when everything around you looks opposite to it. That's what faith looks like. Believing God's word when reality doesn't match. It's standing in the middle of the storm and declaring, "I still trust you, even here." It's choosing to anchor your heart in what He said instead of what you see. And here's the thing, sometimes the promise changes you before it shows up for you. In waiting for it, you become stronger, wiser, and more aligned with the person you need to be to receive it. The process is shaping you into someone who can carry the weight of what you've been promised. Without the process, you might get the promise, but lose it quickly. When you truly understand that God's promises don't have an expiration date, you stop rushing Him. You stop panicking when life takes unexpected turns. Instead, you begin to trust that even the detours are part of the route. You understand that every step, forward or sideways, is still leading you toward what He said would come to pass. We often think faith is strongest when life feels easy, when prayers are answered quickly, and when everything around us aligns with what we've been believing for. But real faith, the kind that anchors your soul, doesn't develop in the comfort of the light. It's forged in the shadows, in the places where you can't see the outcome and you have to walk, even when the path is hidden. Darkness is not the absence of God's work. Sometimes it's the workshop where He shapes the strongest parts of your spirit. When you can't see the way forward, you learn to lean on His voice instead of your vision. In the dark, you don't have the luxury of depending on your own understanding, because your understanding can't see past the moment. That's when you start realizing that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. The dark seasons strip away false securities, forcing you to place your weight fully on God. And that's when faith roots itself deep. We often pray for strong faith, but resist the conditions that grow it. Faith doesn't get stronger by staying in safe, predictable places. It grows when you're standing in uncertainty, holding on to God's word with nothing else to support you. Darkness makes you depend on Him in ways that comfort never will. It's there that you learn His presence is more dependable than your plan. Think about the seed in the soil. It's buried in darkness long before it ever breaks the surface. No one sees the process, but under that soil, transformation is happening. The roots are forming. The seed is strengthening. And it's preparing to push through. That's exactly how God works with your faith. He allows seasons where you feel buried, not to destroy you, but to grow you in a way that will sustain your future harvest. The dark can be scary because it's unfamiliar. Fear tries to convince you that if you can't see it, it's not happening. But faith says the opposite. It says that the unseen is where God does His most powerful work. Just because you can't trace His hand doesn't mean you can't trust His heart. You may not see the miracle forming, but that doesn't mean it's not already on its way. In fact, the dark has a way of sharpening your other senses. Spiritually, this means you start recognizing God's voice more clearly, feeling His presence more deeply, and discerning His will more accurately. You start living by what He says rather than what you see. The less you can rely on your own sight, the more you begin to walk by faith. And that's exactly how He wants you to live. When you look back, you'll often realize the seasons that felt like the darkest valleys were actually the most transformative chapters of your life. Those were the times when you discovered a strength you didn't know you had, when you developed a prayer life that was more desperate and more real, and when you learned to worship without needing a reason. That's not faith in theory. It's faith in action. So, when you find yourself in a place where nothing makes sense, and it feels like God has gone silent, remind yourself faith grows here. In the dark, in the waiting, in the uncertainty. You're not lost. You're being rooted. And roots don't grow in the light. They grow in hidden places where God is preparing you for the moment you will rise.